Let's say you want to build a building. You can build a house or a hut. A house is made of concrete. It requires a lot of planning, requires a floor plan to be made, requires a team to build, like a mason, a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter, and so on. It has to adhere to certain laws. You can't change your mind once construction starts, and it will last for decades. A hut is the opposite. One person can do it, maybe in a day or two. There are no laws. It won't last long, but on the other hand, it is very quick to build, very cheap to build in money. How does this apply to software? Well, when you're building software, you can either build a house or a hut. What would the equivalents be? A hut is often called a prototype. Sometimes people use other words like MVP, which are very loaded. And MVP can mean different things to different people. So I'll avoid that terminology. I'll talk about a house and a hut. Let's look at some factors that would affect the comparison, affect the decision, I mean. How much does a hut cost? How much does a house cost? A house costs $1 million a year because you need to work on feature development, UX, latency, reliability, security, scalability, maintenance, and so on, right? Need to research new platforms and so on. You need some DevOps work. You may need an API, right? You may need sales engineers, support engineers, documentation, and so on. All this may require hiring, which is by itself another project to do. So when you add up all the activities needed and you calculate how many people are needed in a team, it works out to $1 million a year. Now you can quibble with the specifics, maybe it's 5 crores, that's okay. But 1 crore won't work considering today's salaries. A hut can cost you $1,000 or less, tens of thousands. You can even do it for 0 rupees. How many engineers do you need? A house requires 10 plus when you consider all of these areas of work. A hut requires one or even zero. A house definitely requires a UX designer unless you're doing something purely on the backend side. But most products would require a UX designer. A hut probably requires a UX designer because people judge things by their prettiness, right? And the purpose of a hut is just to show it to users and say, is this what you want? It's just a way to have a conversation. I'll give you an example from Star Trek. They visit a planet which has cities and roads and so on, skyscrapers, everything. And they try to make contact with the people on the ground, but no one responds. And they scan the planet. And then they find there are no life forms and high level of radioactivity. So the planet has had a nuclear winter, right? That's why that is happening. Um, so as they leave, one of the crew members, who is an android, a robot, asks the captain, why would any advanced civilization destroy itself? And the captain doesn't have an answer, right? He's ashen faced, and it ends. And then I realized the entire purpose of the episode, which may have cost, I don't know, $100 million, I mean, $100,000 plus to make, at least tens of thousands of dollars, was to remind us that we are killing our planet and ourselves. And this entire thing was an excuse to pose this question. The entire starship and people and going to a planet, the entire story is told to convey a moral, right? But if you just tell the moral directly, if you just stop people on the road and say, hey, don't destroy the planet, they'll be like, what the hell? Leave me alone. They'll think you're a crazy person. So The entire purpose of this was to create an environment in which the question could be posed and the viewers would accept the question, would accept the premise. Similarly, when you make a hut, you show it to people, and that provokes conversations. You can't just ask, hey, do you want an app that does A, B, C? They'll think about it and make a guess. They may say yes, they may say no. It doesn't mean anything. You can't show them a PDF file with all kinds of requirements and non requirements, like a PRD. That would be like Facebook terms and conditions, right? No one will understand what section 4.2.7 clause C means. That doesn't achieve anything. So you want to build a hut only to show it to people and get feedback. And for that, you need a UX designer because people judge an app based on its visual polish, not on how the internals are. You would probably buy a BMW with a Tata Nano engine over a Tata Nano with a BMW engine, right? What's on the outside counts to people. And they use it as a proxy for the product as a whole. So you probably need a UX designer here, and you definitely need one here. The reason I said probably here is if some other people in the team have UX design skills to a level of 80%, may not be as good as a designer, then it works. And if you have a designer or one person, you probably don't need an engineer. So one of the points here is that do you need a multidisciplinary team? For a house you do, for a hut you don't. One person is enough. A multidisciplinary team who are specialists in each of their area. A UX designer who is a better designer than me, for example. An engineer who's a better engineer than me. A product manager who's a better PM than me, right? Or a marketer who's a better PM than better marketer than me. That level of specialization in multiple areas is required for a house, not for a hut. If there's one person who can do other things or multiple things, more or less to some extent, that works out. Do you need technical leadership like an architect or a CTO? No, not for a hut. You do for a house. Do you need a product leader? N- Not for a hut? Yes, for a house. Who will decide what to do, when to do, what's a priority, and so on. Do you need any kind of planning and process? For a hut, no. For a house, yes. You need architecture reviews, you need code reviews, you need coding guidelines. You need to have a continuous deployment mechanism. You may want to have unit tests or may not. But all these processes come in, right? You need planning. When someone says, hey, let's do this, you should ask, hey, is this more or less priority than all the other things that we already agreed to? Where does it fit in the list? Does it go to the top? Does it fit in somewhere here? Does it go to the bottom or does it go away? It's not even something we're doing. This kind of planning is needed. But for a hut, you can just do things in a chaotic manner. How long does a hut take to build? Can be days, weeks. A house can take years to build. Do you need external investment like a angel investor or a VC? More VC than angel. For a hut, no. For a house, yes. So if you're starting a startup, start with this. Maybe even before you quit your job. How long will a hut last? Weeks before a storm comes, or a heavy rain, or a hailstorm, and it's gone. A house lasts for years. When should you build a hut? Before you validate it. And you build a house after you validate the features and the UX and everything. In fact, the goal of building the hut is to get to validation. And after that, the goal of building a house is to build a reliable product. You can and should build multiple huts. Explore different variants of your idea. If each takes days to build, there's no reason why you shouldn't go broad and then deep later on. The broad phase is a hut, the deep phase is a house, and you can build max one. Again, I'm not talking about like a Microsoft here, which has n number of products. I'm talking about early stage startups. And the reason I said max is you may very well decide there is nothing to do. There are no user needs that are unmet, or whatever it may be. You may decide not to continue with the project, with the startup. So that's why it's max one. Can you make commitments to customers based on what you built? No, not with a hut. With a house, yes. Do you need maintenance? A hut doesn't, a house does. This is no different from anything that you want to last for years, like a car. It needs maintenance, right? The story is not over when you buy it. So, some amount of the engineering budget should go towards maintenance in every engineering team for a house, not for a hut. Is it sustainable? No, because you're not maintaining it and it's not architected properly or at all. A hut will disintegrate soon. The question is not will the hut last? The question is do you get the outcomes you want from the hut before it goes away? A house is sustainable. Again, if you build it properly. What about reliability? No. A hut can have outages, bugs, anything. A house is reliable. Is a hut scalable? No. If more users come in, it may not work. A house is scalable. Is a hut extensible? No, it's not. You can't build a second story. It will collapse because it doesn't have the foundation. A house is extensible. Again, a well-built house. Is a hut secure? No, it's not. You may not even have logins, or you may not even validate passwords. So maybe I can access your data by typing in your email ID, right? It's full of hacks like this. A house should be secure. So, and one last thing I forgot to mention, which I forgot to write down here, is that low code tools can be an especially good fit for a hut because anyone can build them. They take very little time, cost, training, money. You don't need to have engineers on your team, etc. And even if you are an engineer, you can do it much faster with a low code tool. And they may not be very extensible, but that's okay. If it has worked, if it has given you what it should, that's okay. Right? So anyway, these are some things, some factors that weigh into the decision of whether to build a house or a hut, or rather when to build a house or a hut. Every startup should start by building multiple huts, then pick one to build a house based on it. And be clear what you're doing. Many founders are not. They make the investments or lack of investments in this column, and then they expect the outcomes in this column, which is a joke, right? So be clear what you're doing. If you're building a hut, don't expect it to last for years and stand up to storms and so on. Understand what you're doing and why.